Robert Towery was convicted in Maricopa County of murdering philanthropist Mark Jones during an armed robbery. The prosecution is seeking the death penalty.
Robert Towery putting the zip tie around Mark Jones's neck and listening to the noises that Mark Jones made, and he tightened it until Jones was dead.
Robert Towery was a killer.
We didn't need to kill this man, but he did anyway.
That was a drug-addicted, wild, crazed human that I don't recognize.
The day before this murder took place, he and his girlfriend had robbed a restaurant. So he was on a bender.
Robert was convicted of murder and sentenced to death.
When the judge said, "I sentence you to death," I had this urge to just jump over the railing and hug him. My name is Christine Towery McClaine. There's my brother, my sober, non-addicted brother, and then there's the monster that killed the man.
In 2012, 47-year-old killer Robert Towery was on death row in Arizona. When a date was set for his execution, he made one final plea for clemency.
Good morning. There are two things that we'll be considering today, and they would be, number one, Mr. Towery's request for a commutation of his sentence, after which we will then take a vote on whether or not a reprieve of Mr. Towery's scheduled execution should be recommended to the governor. Mr. Towery, go ahead.
First and foremost, I'd like to apologize to Mark's family. I have the deepest regrets for what I did. And I'm truly sorry for their loss, for what I did to them. I truly wish with my heart that I had not taken Mark's life. And it's a terrible thing that I did, and it should never have happened.
Towery said that he knew he didn't need to kill this man, but he did anyway. He put a zip tie around the man's neck and just pulled it tight until the man was dead.
Robert Towery's sister attended in support of her brother and to testify about the abuse she and Robert had suffered at the hands of their mother.
I'm Robert's sister. It wasn't mild child abuse that we went through. And post-traumatic stress syndrome has affected all of our lives.
A member of the Clemency Board stated their opinion.
He thought quite rationally that a gun makes noise and zip ties don't. That to me is a rational thought product. I'm not convinced that he was under the dire influence of all these evil things that had occurred to the man in a very wretched environment up to through childhood.
I would like to apologize to my family for being such a train wreck for so many years. I'm sorry that my actions 20 years ago is bringing back all the pain of our past.
Robert Towery was born on July 20th, 1964. Christine was 2.5 years old.
I remember feeling this sense of excitement about having a little brother coming into the family. This picture is from August of 1965, and he was born in July, so he was about a year old. I'm looking like I'm not very happy in this.
His mother was very abusive, physically abusive, emotionally abusive. Robert had no father figure in his life. His birth father left shortly after he was born.
Robert and Christine's mother was left alone to raise her young children. In 1966, the family left Florida and moved to Arizona.
This picture might have been right after we moved to Arizona because there's no dad in the picture, so I think this was after my mom left. It's crazy to me because I look at these pictures and when they said smile, we smiled. I think we just obeyed everything because if I look at her face now and I think back on seeing that woman, there was just so much violence happening to all of us at that time. We were beaten regularly. We were screamed at all the time. One of the things I remember is her continually telling Robbie, "You're gonna end up in prison for the rest of your life. You're no good, you're awful."
I was in fear for my life. I was always afraid that she was gonna kill me. You know, I've got scars on my body that some of them I know are her doing.
When their mother was on a rampage, they would hide there. Robbie, as they called him, would bear the brunt of that and usually be beaten savagely.
It's unbelievable how much distress and disturbance and violence those children would have experienced in the family environment that Christine is describing. It sounds horrific, absolutely horrific.
Even away from his mother, Robert wasn't safe.
By the time he was 6, he had been raped by a neighbor. He had been accidentally shot. And I don't know the exact circumstances of how he was shot, but he had experienced all of this abuse.
The only people Robert and Christine felt they could count on were each other.
He and I were very close growing up. Throughout it all, he and I always just had each other's back. There was just this connection there. When we were little and we'd get banished to our rooms, his was right across from mine, and we would use his little Hot Wheel cars. We would put notes on that little car and scoot it across the hallway to each other and then communicate back and forth like that.
I remember going and sitting in your room a lot, sometimes when you weren't even there. It was the only place I felt safe, I guess, from Mom. I always felt as though you'd protect me. Even when you told on me and I got in trouble, I know you never told on me to get me hurt.
They do have a sense of loving one another as siblings, but also they had something in common, which was there was a monster in the home who was the mother figure who was supposed to be loving and taking care of them, and she was the antagonist. So they banded together to support each other. That's a sensible survival method.
As Robert and Christine grew up, their mother had a number of partners. In 1976, she started a new relationship with a man who would play a pivotal role in Robert's life.
He would come and work on my mom's car, and Robbie was probably 12 years old. And so they would be out there working on the cars together, or so we thought. It turns out he was teaching him how to steal cars and how to rob people. Our neighbors had this Volkswagen that they parked in front of their house. And one morning I looked out there and I'm like, their tires are gone. Where are their tires for their car? Robbie goes, he taught me how to do that. So that was his mentorship.
This is the most loving figure of a parental nature that Robert had. So that's what he did. He's found a way to function in a world because he had no other alternative.
Out of the blue, Christine and Robert's mom decided to leave Arizona. and went to live with her sister and brother-in-law in Louisiana.
My brother moved with my mother to Louisiana. He was probably 15 or 16. I didn't go with because I was like, oh, heck no. I've had enough of this. I'm going to stay here and live my life. And I had already had a job. I felt bad when he left because I knew that he was going to be alone with her. And that was kind of scary to think about.
In Louisiana, teenage Robert continued his life of crime. And he also found a new vice.
That's when he was first introduced to the hard drugs. My aunt and uncle tell me the story about how, he would show up and they would kick him off the property because he was just wild-eyed and crazy.
Robert increasingly got involved in crime. He worked both sides of being a mechanic, fixing cars and knowing how to steal them and how to steal the parts.
He was a monster. He was fueled by methamphetamine and anger and a wretched, horrid upbringing.
Robert Towery had been living in Louisiana for 2 years. He was now 17, a drug addict, and committing crimes to feed his habit.
My aunt called me one day and said, okay, your brother's off. He's off to jail. We had him arrested because he's been stealing from us, he's been stealing from the neighbors, and he's not doing okay. When he was arrested, they searched the house that they lived in. They found money stashed in the walls. When the cops put him in the car, they were standing behind the patrol car, and he turned around and looked at them through the back window, and they described this look on his face that scared them, and they called it like bone-chilling. They were literally afraid that if he ever got out that he would hurt them.
Robert Towery was sent to a juvenile detention center.
When my brother got arrested and was put in juvenile detention, we may have written some letters because I have some memory of knowing that he was very afraid. Talking about Louisiana, it's humid, it's hot, the cells were filthy, the food was moldy.
Robert's previous crimes committed in his home state of Arizona eventually caught up with him. And around 2 years later, he was suddenly transferred to an adult prison back in Arizona.
He had committed crimes while he was here before he left to Louisiana, and they brought him back. The crimes were committed before he was 18.
With her brother now closer to home, Christine went to visit him.
I visited him probably once or twice a month for sure. We developed our closest bond. He was sober, and that's, I think, when our adult relationship probably was most developed during that time that I was visiting him in prison. It was just so good to have him in my life again. And he was my best friend and somebody that I cared deeply about.
After 5 years in Perryville State Prison, Robert Towery, now 24, was released and placed on parole.
When he was released from Perryville, I had this Camaro, and I put champagne in an ice bucket in the back trunk. I picked him up. We got in the car, and I said, I have some champagne in the back. We're going to celebrate. When we took these pictures, he's fresh out of prison. He looks very calm and soft, but when he's doing like the full body pose, he's posturing. The look on his face is so different and dark when he's with my mom, the contrast than when he's with me.
Robert got work as a mechanic.
He was living the good life. He was working. He had a woman in his life. He was so excited. Just having a normal life. He was doing well.
A year later, Christine began to notice a change in her brother's behavior that worried her.
There were times when he'd show up and he was perfectly fine, and there were times when he would show up and I would be like, I'm smelling it again. He and I were so close that I could feel his mood and feel him, kind of like, is this the good Robbie? Is this the evil Robbie? I've seen the scared Robbie, I've seen the evil Robbie, I've seen the good Robbie.
Robert was back on drugs.
He was doing so much methamphetamine that how he didn't die is beyond me. How he didn't overdose is beyond me.
This is what I need to do as a survival mechanism. This is who I am. This is how I live. It just goes into this massive, vicious cycle of drug abuse, crime. That's the path he's taken as an adult.
He was going down a darker road, and I knew that. And there was just a disconnect. I don't think we talked very much at all during that time. I knew that he had started his own business. He was an auto mechanic, so he was doing like this mobile service. So I knew that he was working. I think that was kind of why I just didn't really worry about it too much. So he was busy having his life and doing his thing, and I was busy doing mine.
Robert Towery needed to fund his drug addiction and went to rob a local restaurant.
He had gone to a restaurant to steal money from the till. When he went in, he had a gun. He shot the jukebox to scare everybody to stop them. And then there was only like 5 or 6 people, I guess, in there. He tied them all up with zip ties, and they robbed it. His girlfriend was waiting in the car for him.
They sped away from the scene of the crime. In the evening of September 4th, 1991, 27-year-old Robert Towery and his friend Randy Barker waved down a cab and told the driver to take them to Paradise Valley and to the house of a well-known local philanthropist, Mark Jones.
Paradise Valley is a very rich area. The houses tend to be large. You know, they're far enough away from each other that you wouldn't necessarily hear anything, you wouldn't necessarily notice anything. Robert had done business with Mark Jones before. He had borrowed money from him, and he had done mechanical work for him, so he knew that he knew that he had cash. He knew that he had a well-apportioned home. Their story was that their car broke down and they wanted to use the phone. Robert had said, "You remember me?" And Mark Jones let them in.
They both knew the victim. They had been to his home on a number of occasions. On this particular day, they went there to rob him.
Robert pulled a gun on him and made him lay down in the bed so he could be more comfortable, and then had brought large, long zip ties, one of which he put around Mark Jones's neck.
While my brother was ransacking the house and stealing things, Randy was holding a gun on Mark to keep him from getting away, from keeping him from escaping. And then at some point in time, my brother came into the room and ended up using zip ties to choke Mark to death.
And pulling it tight and listening to the noises that Mark Jones made at a point where he thought that Mark Jones was dead. He had stopped making noises and then realized he was not dead. And he did it again, and he tightened it until Jones was dead.
"24 hours after the drug-fueled robbery and murder, the body of Mark Jones was found by police after a neighbor had called to ask them to do a welfare check on Mark. As Mark Jones's house became an active crime scene, Towery was visited by police who were questioning him about the armed robbery he recently committed.
One of the waitresses that he had not tied up, he whispered in her ear, "You're gonna get out soon. You'll be fine. Just give me 5." So he had not tied her up. He just wanted the money. They got into a fight long enough that they didn't drive away. The waitress and all the people got free and they came outside and got the license plate.
The license plate had led the police to Robert Towery's door. As the police searched his home, they made a shocking discovery.
They found equipment, stereo equipment, and other stuff that belonged to Mark. And that's how they found out that he had been there and stolen all that stuff from him.
Robert Towery was immediately arrested and charged with 4 counts of robbery and 4 counts of kidnapping, and the murder of Mark Jones.
When my brother first got caught, he was still using. He was still the typical meth liar. He denied it. He was pleading not guilty to everybody, including me. When I found out that he killed a man, I was mad. And how selfish of you to go down this road and get this screwed up and take somebody's life, an innocent man's life. What a wretched human you are. I felt like, you know what, whatever he gets, he deserves, seriously. And also, I remember being worried about people finding out that it was my brother, because I was ashamed.
"27-year-old Robert Towery had been arrested and charged for the murder of Mark Jones and for armed robbery and kidnapping at a local restaurant.
I was found guilty of robbing and kidnapping. The only communication that we had during that time was just through phone calls and letters.
On May 1st, 1992, Towery was sentenced to life imprisonment. 3 months later, on August 3rd, Robert Towery went on trial for the murder of Mark Jones. He pled not guilty. Christine was called to the witness stand by her brother's defense lawyer.
How do you defend somebody who did something like that? But the defense attorney had said, you need to take the stand, because they were really going to push on this abuse, the child abuse, the drug abuse, all that. When I took the stand, I was so callous in the beginning because I was angry with him, I guess. I said, whatever he did, there's no excuse for. It doesn't matter how you're brought up. It doesn't matter if you're on drugs or what you're on drugs, you still make these choices. The judge said, I'm looking at 2 women who seem to have come from the same place, and they're fine. They're not murderers, they're not thieves, they're not drug addicts, they're fine.
Robert Towery was found guilty of the murder of Mark Jones, and on November 20th was sentenced to death.
When the judge said, I sentence you to death, I had this urge to just jump over the railing and hug him. And I didn't for 2 reasons. I didn't want to get in trouble. My second thought was, well, what if he grabs you and is like, I'm gonna kill her if you don't let me out of here? The moment was more full of fear and regret than anything else, because I wanted to hug him and hold him. He just got sentenced to death and I couldn't do that.
My name is Dale Beisch. I represented Robert Towery when he was on death row in Arizona. In order to be eligible for the death penalty in Arizona, there has to be murder plus something more. That would be what's called aggravating circumstances. So for instance, if a murder is committed in the course of a robbery, that murder would be eligible for the death penalty.
There's two people there. There's the murderer, who nobody has any feelings for, and then there's the human, who's my brother, who I've loved my whole life, and I love him still. I wasn't gonna think about it every day. I was gonna make it, like, define my life and what I was doing. So I didn't visit him very much, because when you go to visit, it brings everything to the foreground. In the beginning, because I was so mad and honestly really kind of callous about it, he was an imposition to me. He had not owned it yet. He had not apologized. He didn't show remorse. And throughout that time, I had no respect for him.
Randy Barker, Robert Towery's friend, was also charged with murder, but it did not go to trial.
Randy Barker entered into a plea agreement to second-degree murder in exchange for his testimony against Robert Towery. He was sentenced then to 10 years in prison.
After 5 years behind bars, Christine started to see a positive change in her brother.
Everything changed when he admitted to me that he did it, and I could see that he felt bad and had remorse for doing it. That's when things shifted dramatically for me, as far as how I felt about him.
Christine continued to visit her brother over the next 20 years.
I didn't visit as much as I probably should have or could have, but I wrote a lot of letters. We had a lot of phone calls. Every time I went to see him, I dreaded the experience because it made everything real again. It brought everything to the foreground. While I was in the visit itself, I was perfectly fine. We'd have good conversations, and he'd play with the kids, and we had good times. But then I would get home, and I'd be all messed up again, because it was now real. It was now in my face again, that this was actually my life. This is my brother's life, and it was an inconvenience, and I'm guilty. I'm feeling guilty because I don't want to spend my time visiting him, but yet there he is all alone.
20 years after his conviction, Robert Towery's execution date was set for March 8th, 2012.
I met Robert probably 6 months before he was scheduled to be executed. I was very impressed with him as a person. I saw a lot of remorse and humanity in Robert. He was approaching his scheduled execution date, and we tried to put together a case asking for Robert's life to be spared.
On February 2nd, 2012, 48-year-old Robert Towery was moved to death watch.
35 days before a scheduled execution date, the prisoner is removed from his cell on death row and put in a special cell. A person is watched 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's a very restrictive environment. If Robert needed toilet paper, he would have to ask for it.
They're just watched. They want to make sure that the person does not commit suicide, which is ironic, that they want to make sure that the person is executed rather than taking his own life.
A month later, on March 2nd, Robert Towery and his team of lawyers, including Dale Bache, tried to get his death sentence commuted to life in prison.
Robert wanted a clemency hearing because Robert wanted to live. Robert wanted to publicly express the remorse for what he did and to apologize to the family of Mr. Jones.
First and foremost, I'd like to apologize to Mark's family. I have the deepest regrets for what I did.
I was at the clemency hearing. The clemency hearings are held in a big auditorium where they had death row. It's the last chance that a condemned person can possibly, ask that their sentence be commuted, that the execution be stayed.
Robert wanted to live because he was able to build a life while he was on death row. He was no longer using meth. He had sobered up, and Robert grew as a person. He rebuilt his relationship with his family. He was mentoring his sister's son, who did not have a father figure in his life. So Robert had a lot to live for, and he was willing to spend the rest of his life in prison.
He's a human being. He wasn't sitting at a table shackled or whatever. He was literally in a cage, like an animal. It was like, why? Why is he in a cage? It's ridiculous.
Towery's defense team spoke about the trauma Robert experienced at the hands of his mother.
Robert's about 6 years old in this photograph. This is the year that Robert almost lost his leg to his mother's discipline. Robert's about 8 years old in this picture. This is around the time that Robert's mother bound and gagged him and stuck him in the floorboard of the family's car.
It was then the prosecutor's turn in the hearing.
Your story is very similar to a lot of individuals we see in your situation. They've come from horrendous backgrounds. They're drug addicts and commit a crime that they terribly regret. Years later, they've done well in prison, but the issue is the crime. Why should we look at you any different than any of the other folks in the same situation?
All I know is that I've done my best to change my life. 20 years I've spent getting it together and trying to be a good dad and good uncle. That's all I can do, and try to speak about the life-destroying aspects of drugs. I'm nothing special.
Robbie was pretty emotional during the clemency hearing. He was speaking from his heart. He had his statement prepared. He choked up during it.
I truly wish with my heart that I had not taken Mark's life. And it's a terrible thing that I did, and it should never have happened.
The prosecution responded.
This individual that committed this crime, but now he's cloaked as a victim. I tell you that right is right, and justice is justice. And I ask that you not buy into this notion that he's a victim, and I ask you to not commute his sentence.
A decision on the fate of Robert Towery was made.
Mr. Chairman, I come down on the side of not favoring a commutation to Mr. Towery. This crime was one of the worst of the worst, and when he perpetrated this crime, Mr. Towery was one of the worst of the worst.
But it was just too late, you know?
"4 days after the clemency hearing and the evening before Robert Towery's execution, Christine and Dale went to visit him.
He hadn't had any human touch for 20 years, and I hadn't hugged him in 20 years, and he was about to be killed. I said, so when does that happen? She goes, well, it doesn't. Arizona doesn't allow for that. That was the first time I broke down into tears, because I had been planning on seeing him, hugging him, and touching him for the first time in 20 years before they did that.
I saw Robert the night before he was scheduled to be executed. He was strong, his spirit was strong. He was preparing himself to die.
We went in to visit, and he had reconciled himself. He knew this was coming. He felt like he deserved what was coming. And he's like, I'm good. He called me Chris then. He's like, Chris, I'm good. And the guard says, time's up. And I'm like, no, not yet. And they're like, no, you gotta go. And that's when everything kind of, it flipped in that moment. I looked at him, and as we were saying goodbye, we put our hands up against the glass, and he just started crying, and I started crying, and I can't. To this day, I can still see the agony in his face. And it wasn't the fear of what was gonna happen the next day. It was the pain, you know, of like the reality, the end of the story, that this is, well, it was really happening. I didn't want to leave. I didn't get to hug him. I didn't get to talk to him without the glass between us.
The day of the execution had arrived. Christine was at the prison to support her brother.
The day of the execution was very, very strange. We're standing there, they file in, the curtains open up, and it was the biggest shock of my life. He's laying on the table, and I immediately can see in his face that the person I saw the night before is not the same person I'm looking at now. Something went wrong. When I tell the story about when he was a little baby, like a very young child, and my mom had him on the floorboard, and he was duct taped, and his hands were tied, and he was like looking at me, crying, help me, help me. That face was there again. He was looking tortured. He had clearly been crying. I'm standing there like I'm 12 years old again, and my mom is in charge, and I can't move. And here's my brother who needs my help. And again, I'm not saving him. Didn't save him in the car. Didn't save him when he was drug addicted. And I'm not able to save him again. Here he is, strapped, and I can't stop it. I can't save him.
It was never Christine's job to raise her younger brother. It's the primary caregivers, that's their job. It's your mum and dad or whoever is there to take care of you. It's the adult's job to look after the children, not the children's job to look after the other children.
Robert noted, I feel like a true monster for putting my kids through this. When I think about what I put Mar Jones's family through 20 years ago, I'm right where I should be. I literally destroyed 2 families with what I did. I wish I could take it all back. I'm sorry.
So he closes his eyes, and then he gasps for air.
I continued to watch as the color left Robert's face. A few minutes later, there was an announcement that the execution has been completed, and the curtains closed.
I looked at my watch, and I'm like, it's 11:16. He's dead.
On March 8, 2012, Robert Towery was executed by lethal injection. She stayed afterwards, and later in the day, they allowed her to go see his body. And as she described it to me, she went in, and he was there, and she just started to cry, and she said, Robbie, you're finally free.
The family members are so often the forgotten victims. We tend to forget that they have also lost someone. They're also related to the perpetrator. They have to carry that burden for the rest of their lives.
I want to make it really clear, I'm not looking for sympathy on this. We need to help people that are on drugs. We need to help people that have mental illnesses. We need families to love each other more, to be more present, to be more aware, to be a little braver. So when you see something, move forward, move into it, and don't give up. Don't give up on that person. In my heart, when I think about my brother as a murderer, I feel like I am culpable in so many ways because I didn't save him, which was my goal as a child. It was always my goal to save him. I wished I could have had him in my life when I needed him. And me not doing more to stop it, which is so weird because what power did I have? None.
She can see that what he did was dreadful, but she also loved him. It's so complex for her. And I'm just in awe about the way that she describes those threads of trauma, because that is what she's living with every single day when she thinks about her own life.
Christine often thinks back to the day Robert was sentenced to death and to the moment she shared with the sister of her brother's victim, Mark Jones.
I got a sympathy card and I wrote on there, "I am so sorry for the loss of your brother. Today I will lose mine too." So I handed her the card. The most incredible thing happened. There was a pathway magically there, and she and I met in the center of the courtroom and we hugged each other and we both cried. And it was such a good feeling on the worst day of my life because I had somehow made it better, somehow made it. I needed her to know I was as sad for her as I was. The monster that he was, if I look at and think about that drug-addicted, violent monster, I have no pain about his death. But that's not who they killed. The person that ended up being executed was not the same person. I love him. He's my brother.